Welcome, everybody, to History Analyzed. I'm your host, Mark Palmer. This is a podcast which examines historical events and issues. The event we are analyzing today is the John F. Kennedy assassination. So why are we discussing a murder from 1963? Well, it's because polls show that most people believe there was a conspiracy involved and that Lee Harvey Oswald did not act alone. By the end of this podcast, hopefully you will agree with me and the Warren Commission that Oswald was the lone assassin. There are two types of people who believe in a conspiracy in the Kennedy assassination. The first group is the great majority. These are reasonable people who have read books or articles or seen things online which led them to believe there was a conspiracy. I get it. People read something or watch a documentary which presents something that seems logical. I totally understand those people, but I hope to show them that the information that they've been told was wrong. The other group are the conspiracy nuts. No matter what the evidence shows, you can't convince them. They like believing in these dark forces and sinister conspiracies which control our lives. Here's a good example. There's a photo taken in 1963 by a guy named J.W. Altgens at the time of the assassination. It shows a man standing in front of the Texas School Book Depository who looks like Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, if this was true, then Oswald could not have been the shooter from the 6th floor if he was standing in front of the building at the time of the shooting. However, the man has been identified as an employee of the Texas School Book Depository named Billy Lovelady. Lovelady says, yes, it's him in the photo. The other people in the photo say, yes, it's their friend and co-worker, Billy Lovelady. But does that stop the conspiracy people? No, they still continue to claim it's Oswald. Here's an even better example. On October 4th, 1981, the body of Lee Harvey Oswald was exhumed from a Fort Worth cemetery. Why was he dug up 18 years after being buried? Well, because a lot of the conspiracy people claimed that it was not Oswald in that grave. It was an imposter. This was mostly due to a book by a British author named Michael Eddowes, who claimed that JFK had been shot by a Russian agent posing as Oswald. A team of pathologists examined the body that was exhumed that day and confirmed with dental records and other means that it was definitely Oswald. To his credit, that British author, Michael Eddowes, admitted that he was wrong, and that was Oswald in that grave. But this did not stop the conspiracy zanies who claimed that before the body was exhumed, some unknown conspirators went into the grave. They left the body alone, so it was still the body of that unknown Russian agent, but they replaced the head with the head of Lee Harvey Oswald so that dental records would show it was Oswald. That's right, you heard me. That's the claim. If that scenario of replacing the head of Oswald into the grave before the exhumation of the grave makes sense to you, then just turn this off. No evidence will ever convince you. However, if you have an open mind and are willing to listen to some pretty simple arguments, then please continue. My interest in the questions regarding the Kennedy assassination peaked when I was in law school at USC. I found out that one of my professors, David Slauson, a brilliant guy, very good professor, had been an associate counsel to the Warren Commission. So I asked him, back in 1981, who really killed John F. Kennedy? He explained to me very succinctly how there was no doubt about it that it was Oswald. As a matter of fact, when interviewed by Vincent Bugliosi, who wrote one of the best books upon the subject, Slauson had told Bugliosi that he and the other young guys on the Warren Commission were hoping to find a conspiracy, some kind of dark forces, that it was something other than Oswald. They would have been heroes. They would have been famous. But as much as they dug into it, there just wasn't anything. So why do people doubt the Warren Commission so much? Well, when I read conspiracy theories or talk to people who believe in conspiracy theories on this case, there are two factors they point to which, admittedly, are suspicious. Now, the biggest suspicious item is the fact that just 2 days after the Kennedy assassination, Oswald himself was killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. I firmly believe that if Ruby had not killed Oswald on November 24th, 1963, and Oswald had simply gone to trial, these conspiracy theories would not have arisen. But, as I will demonstrate later on, the timing and circumstances of Ruby shooting Oswald actually prove there was no conspiracy. The other factor that people point to, which really raises their suspicions, is the fact that the film of the assassination shows Kennedy's head going back and to the left when he's shot in the head. Conspiracy people argue that this is proof that Kennedy was shot from the front right, and therefore there was a second gunman present at a location known as the Grassy Knoll. Actually, the facts will show that the headshot could not have come from the front right, the Grassy Knoll area, but came from the rear where Oswald was located. I'll go into these issues in detail a little later, but first some background. What happened on the weekend of November 22 to 24, 1963? JFK was elected in November 1960. Contrary to popular belief, he was not the youngest president ever. He was the youngest person elected as president. Teddy Roosevelt was actually younger when he became president, but Teddy became president as a result of another assassination when William McKinley was shot in 1901 and Teddy was vice president and became president. He was only 42 years old, younger than JFK. In the fall of 1963, Kennedy and his advisors thought it would be a good idea to go on a speaking tour of Texas. This was with an eye towards the election set for 1964. In 1960, JFK had barely won Texas, and he wanted to shore up his support in the Lone Star State. On November 21, 1963, Kennedy traveled with his wife Jackie, as well as his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, and his wife, Lady Bird Johnson, to San Antonio. He spoke in San Antonio that day, and then traveled to Houston and spoke there on the same day, November 21st. Then they traveled to Fort Worth and spent the night of November 21 at the Texas Hotel. By the way, people in Texas love naming things Texas. The name of that hotel, the Texas Hotel. As you'll see later, place where they capture Oswald, it was a movie theater, and of course it was called the Texas Theater. So back to our narrative. On the morning of November 22, JFK gave a speech outdoors in Fort Worth, and then gave a breakfast speech at the Texas Hotel. Then the presidential party, meaning JFK, Jackie, Vice President Johnson and his wife, as well as all of their staff, flew from Fort Worth to Love Field in Dallas. Now, I had always wondered, why did they fly from Fort Worth to Dallas? Those two cities are about 30 miles apart. They did this because JFK understood the grandeur of Air Force One landing at an airport and he and Jackie coming down the steps off the plane. The crowds loved that. That's why there was a large crowd at Love Field to welcome the Kennedys. JFK was scheduled to speak at a luncheon at the Trade Mart in Dallas. But first, there was going to be a presidential motorcade through the city so people could see them. And probably as many people were out to see his glamorous wife as compared to JFK himself. The route for the motorcade was only selected on November 18, 4 days before the visit to Dallas. The motorcade route was announced in the newspapers on November 19th, 3 days before the assassination. As JFK usually did, in nice weather, he traveled in an open limousine. In this case, it was a 1961 Lincoln Continental four-door convertible. That car, by the way, is now exhibited to the public at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. A lot is made of the fact that the bubble top was not on the presidential limo. It doesn't matter. The bubble top only protected from rain. It was not bulletproof. So who was traveling in the presidential limousine that day? The driver was Secret Service Special Agent William Greer. There was another Secret Service man named Roy Kellerman in the front seat alongside the driver. JFK was in the back seat on the passenger side, and his wife Jackie was in the back seat on the driver's side. There were two extra seats between the front seat and the rear seat called jump seats. Texas Governor John Connally was seated on one of those jump seats in front of JFK, but not directly in front of him, slightly lower and to the left. Connolly's wife, Nellie, was seated on the other jump seat in front of Jackie, but again, not directly in front of her, slightly lower and to the right of Jackie. Right behind the presidential limousine was a car with Secret Service agents, and then there was a car with the vice president and his wife. The motorcade traveled through downtown Dallas. They had large and very enthusiastic crowds. At the end of the route, the motorcade entered Dealey Plaza on Main Street. This is a city park on the western edge of downtown Dallas. The motorcade was supposed to get on the Stemmons Freeway to go to the Trade Mart for the luncheon and JFK's speech. Some people have asked, why did they turn off of Main Street and go in front of the Texas School Book Depository? Well, you had to get on the Stemmons Freeway. You couldn't get onto the Stemmons Freeway from Main Street. So they entered Dealey Plaza, they took a right onto Houston Street, and then a sharp left onto Elm Street. This took them right in front of a building known as the Texas School Book Depository. As they turned onto Elm Street, Nellie Connolly turned and looked at JFK and said, "Mr. President, you can't say that Dallas doesn't love you." And he replied something like, "No, you certainly can't." Those were his last words. As they drove down Elm Street in front of the Texas School Book Depository, a rifle shot was heard. That first shot missed. A few seconds later, a second shot was heard. That shot went through the upper portion of Kennedy's shoulder and out through the front of his neck. The same bullet then struck Governor Connolly, causing several injuries to the governor. I'll discuss the conspiracy theories about this bullet in more detail later. Now, most people would have fallen over when shot through the neck like JFK, but he had a lot of back problems. These back problems required him to wear a very stiff back brace. When you see videos of him greeting his little kids, Caroline and John, you'll notice he doesn't pick them up because he couldn't. He had these severe back problems. There's this famous video of him getting off of Marine One, the presidential helicopter, and as John and Caroline come running up to them, he just leans down and puts his arms around the kids and pats them, but he doesn't pick them up, again, because of the back problems. Anyway, the back brace kept him upright and made him a good target for the final shot. A third rifle shot was heard. It entered the rear of Kennedy's head and blew out the right portion of the front of his skull. This was the fatal shot. I will discuss this in great detail later on. So what happens after the shooting? Well, between the second and third shots, the Secret Service men in the front seat realized what was going on. And to be fair to them, it was only a matter of a few seconds. Kellerman, the man not driving, shouts into the radio to all of the cars in the presidential motorcade, "We've been hit, get us to the hospital." Greer, the driver, starts to speed up, but before he does, the third shot hits JFK's head. The car then speeds up to Parkland Hospital. Before they left Dealey Plaza, Jackie was freaking out and started climbing onto the trunk of the limousine. Later, she said she had no memory of doing this. In an act of incredible bravery, Secret Service man Clint Hill reacted so fast to the second shot that he ran from the Secret Service car, which was following the presidential limousine, and ran up to the Kennedy car. He climbed on the back and shoved Jackie back into the rear seat. The limo arrives at Parkland. Doctors try to revive Kennedy, but the injuries were just too massive. He's pronounced dead at 1:00 p.m. Central Time. So now let's discuss Lee Harvey Oswald. He was born October 18, 1939. Means he was just 24 years old when he shot JFK. Oswald was born in New Orleans. His father died 2 months before he was born. His mother was completely unstable. He had an older brother, Robert, and an older half-brother, John. Both of his older brothers joined the Marines as soon as they were of age to get away from their psychotic mother. His mother kept moving Lee from home to home in New Orleans and the Fort Worth, Texas area. They even lived in New York City for a short while. Because of all these moves, Oswald attended 12 different schools. The constant moving and changing of schools and the unstable home life had a big impact on his mental stability. Oswald drops out of high school and joins the Marines when he turns 17. During his time as a Marine, he becomes obsessed with Marxism. When he gets out of the Marines, he defects to the Soviet Union. When he gets to Moscow in October of 1959, he goes to the American embassy to renounce his citizenship. Oswald speaks with Richard Snyder, the senior consulate official. Snyder asks Oswald why he wants to renounce his American citizenship. Oswald explains that he is a Marxist. Snyder replies that if that's the case, he will be very lonesome in the Soviet Union. That's a great line, but unfortunately that witticism was completely lost on Oswald. Snyder had dealt with several Americans who had defected to the Soviet Union and then changed their minds. For that reason and the fact that Oswald was only 20 years old, Snyder wanted to give Oswald some time to think about it and hopefully change his mind. So he told Oswald that he would have to come back the following week to fill out the paperwork. Oswald never returned. Oswald went to the Soviets and applied for Russian citizenship. It was denied. He was told that he was going to have to leave the Soviet Union when his visa expired. So what did he do? He slit his wrists trying to kill himself. He was found, brought to the hospital. Obviously, he survived. Now, while he was in the hospital, Soviet officials, including the KGB, considered what a PR nightmare this would be to have a former American Marine die while visiting Moscow. So they decided to allow him to stay, not as a Soviet citizen, but as a foreign resident. He was given an apartment and a job in Minsk, working in a factory building radios. While living in Minsk, he meets a local girl named Marina Pruzakova. They get married, and they have a baby named June on February 15, 1962. Before June was born, Oswald realized what life was like in the Soviet Union and wanted to return to America. What a shock. He applied to the Soviets for exit visas for himself and his Soviet wife. They also contacted the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Took a long time, but they were finally granted permission to leave the Soviet Union and return to the U.S. They arrived back in Texas on June 14, 1962. They temporarily lived with Lee's brother Robert in his home in Fort Worth. Eventually, Lee, Marina, and baby June get their own place to live. They moved around quite a bit in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, usually living in the worst apartments because they have very little money. Oswald's a high school dropout and has no marketable skills. He keeps getting various menial jobs, but he gets fired from each of them because of his laziness and his abrasive personality. A bizarre but meaningful incident occurs in the spring of 1963. There was a man named Edwin Walker. He was a retired U.S. Army general. Fun fact, he was the only U.S. Army general in the 20th century to resign his commission during his tour of duty. He resigned after being publicly and formally admonished by the Joint Chiefs of Staff for his political views. He was a white supremacist and a member of the John Birch Society. He became very prominent. Matter of fact, on December 4, 1961, Walker was on the cover of Newsweek magazine with the headline, "Thunder on the Right." Well, on April 10, 1963, Oswald tried to kill Edwin Walker. While Walker was sitting at his desk in his home doing his taxes, Oswald fired a shot through the window. Fortunately for Walker, the bullet hit the small piece of wood which separated the window panes, deflecting the bullet enough that it went just over Walker's head. Marina did not know about Oswald's plans. She found out about this when she discovered a note that Lee left her the night of April 10, 1963. The note described their financial situation and how she should react when the police come to question her about his shooting Walker. Marina decides after that failed Walker assassination that it would be good if they left Texas. She convinced him to move back to his hometown of New Orleans. Now, while living in New Orleans, Oswald gets arrested because of a physical scuffle with anti-Castro people. Oswald was handing out pamphlets entitled Hands Off Cuba, which he obtained from the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Oswald was a big fanboy of Fidel Castro. For that incident, he paid a fine but did not have to go to jail. So what was their married life like? Well, besides being a murderer, Oswald was often a wife-beater. He physically beat Marina on many occasions. She temporarily left him a couple of times, but she went back to him since she was a foreigner who did not speak English. She didn't have that many options. She left him for the last time in September 1963. At that time, she moved in with a friend named Ruth Payne. Ruth and Marina had become friends. Ruth was an American, but she had been learning to speak Russian, and she and Marina helped each other learn each other's languages. In September 1963, Marina moved into Ruth Payne's house in Irving, which is a suburb of Dallas. Oswald was always a malcontent. He was always unhappy wherever he was and whatever he was doing. In the summer of 1963, he told Marina that he wanted them to move back to the Soviet Union. Yeah, that's right, the place that was so horrible that he left a little over a year ago. Oswald writes to the Soviet embassy in Washington and requests permission to return to the USSR. He forces Marina to write such requests also. And I do mean forced, threats of beatings. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when in New Orleans, Oswald got involved in demonstrations which were pro-Castro and pro the communist government of Cuba. He decided that he wanted to move to Cuba with Marina, who was pregnant with their second child. He tried to convince Marina that the two of them would hijack a commercial jet and force it to land in Havana. He was serious about doing this with a toddler and a pregnant wife. Even the threat of beatings could not convince Marina to go along with this harebrained scheme. When Marina moved to Irving to live with Ruth Payne, Oswald traveled to Mexico City. Now, Marina did not know he was going to do this. He went to Mexico City to contact the Cuban embassy to get a travel visa to Cuba. He claimed that he was only going to stop in Cuba on his way to the Soviet Union, but it was clear that he intended on staying in Cuba. The Cuban embassy turned him down. His visa to Mexico expired, and he had to return by bus to the U.S. Since he had moved out of their New Orleans home, and Marina was now living in Irving, Texas, Oswald moved into a boarding house in Dallas. On October 14, 1963, just a little over a month before the assassination, Oswald moved into another rooming house in Dallas located at 1026 North Beckley Avenue. On that same day, Ruth Payne was speaking with one of her neighbors, Linnie Mae Randall, telling Ms. Randall how her friend's husband needed a job, meaning Oswald. Ms. Randall said that her 19-year-old brother, Wesley Frazier, who lived in the same house as Ms. Randall, had just gotten a job at the Texas School Book Depository in Dallas, and they were still hiring. That's how Oswald got the job at the Texas School Book Depository as a stock boy, to use the term from that period of time. His job was to fulfill orders, which meant find books in the 7-story building and bring them to the loading dock downstairs. For the next several weeks, Oswald lived in the rooming house in Dallas. On weekends, he would visit Marina at Ruth Payne's house in Irving. Wesley Frazier, who lived in Irving at his sister's house, would give Oswald a ride to Irving on Fridays after work, and then take Oswald back to work on Mondays, and Oswald would stay in the boarding house during the week. This was the normal routine, but this changed on Thursday, November 21, 1963, the night before the assassination. Oswald asked Frazier for a ride after work, and Frazier told him, sure, but did ask Oswald why was he going out to Irving on a Thursday instead of Friday like usual. Oswald told Frazier that he was picking up some curtain rods he had stored in Ruth Payne's garage. That evening, Ruth and Marina were both unhappy to see Oswald because he was not supposed to be there except on weekends. That night, Oswald had a long discussion with Marina, pleading for her to take him back, but she says no. The fateful day, November 22, 1963. On that morning, a Friday, Oswald got up for work. Marina stayed in bed. He told her that he left some money on the dresser for her to buy whatever was necessary for her and their daughter. She later discovered that he had left her $170, which was almost everything he had. Oswald kept only $13. And $170 then would be worth about $1,600 today. So Oswald walked over to the house where Wesley Frazier and Linnie Mae Randall lived and put a package on the back seat of Frazier's car. When Frazier got into the car, he asked Oswald what was in the brown paper package, and Oswald told him it was the curtain rods. Frazier and Oswald drove to work, which began at 8 a.m. The presidential motorcade was scheduled to go through Dealey Plaza, right in front of the Texas School Book Depository, at approximately 12:30. Oswald was last seen before the assassination on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository where the shots came from. I'll go into detail later of the proof that Oswald was the shooter. Immediately after the shooting, Oswald descends the 5 flights of stairs to the 1st floor and goes out of the front door during the chaos before the police seal the building. But before leaving the building, Oswald is stopped by police officer Marion Baker. Baker had been riding a motorcycle in the presidential motorcade, and when he heard the shots, he was convinced they came from the roof of the Texas School Book Depository. So he immediately runs into the building. On the 2nd floor, Baker sees Oswald and stops him. Baker asks Roy Truly, the manager of the Texas School Book Depository, if he knows this man. Truly tells Officer Baker that Oswald works there, and the cop releases Oswald and continues running upstairs to see where the shots came from. When Oswald leaves the building, he walks several blocks to the east and boards a bus to go to his boarding house. After a couple of blocks, the bus is completely stopped in traffic because of all the bedlam caused by the shooting. Oswald gets off the bus and walks several blocks until he finds a taxi, which he takes to Oak Cliff and gets dropped off near his boarding house. He enters the boarding house, and the lady who runs it sees him and says, "You're in a hurry," but he doesn't say anything back. He goes into his room, gets a jacket, and his .38 caliber revolver. During the shooting, a man named Howard Brennan was watching the presidential motorcade in Dealey Plaza across the street from the Texas School Book Depository. He happened to look up and saw Oswald shooting Kennedy. Immediately after the shooting, Howard Brennan reported what he saw to a police officer in Dealey Plaza. Now, though the shooter had not yet been identified, the police now had a physical description. Howard Brennan's description of the shooter was sent out to all of the police units in Dallas. At approximately 1:15 p.m., which was 45 minutes after Kennedy was shot, Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit was patrolling in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas. At the corner of 10th Street and Patton Avenue, Tippit saw a man walking that generally fit the description of the president's assassin. Tippit stopped his car alongside the man and talked to him a little bit through the passenger side window. Then Tippit got out of his police car, and as he walked to the front of the car, he was shot 4 times by Lee Harvey Oswald. J.D. Tippit died in the street. Oswald flees the scene of the shooting of J.D. Tippit. Several witnesses saw him shoot the police officer and saw him leave the scene. Oswald goes south on Patton Avenue and turns right onto Jefferson Boulevard, a major commercial street. Police cars with sirens are driving all over Dallas, including Jefferson Boulevard. So Oswald ducks into the foyer of Hardy's shoe store, but he doesn't enter the store. 22-year-old Johnny Brewer, the store manager, was listening to radio reports of the Kennedy assassination inside the shoe store. He noticed Oswald acting strangely. Oswald was keeping his back to the street and looking over his shoulder as the police cars drove by. After the police cars are gone, Oswald proceeds west down Jefferson Boulevard, and Johnny Brewer decides to follow him. He sees Oswald duck into the Texas movie theater. Brewer asks Julia Postal, the 47-year-old ticket taker, if that man had bought a ticket, and she tells him no. He tells her to call the police because he thinks this guy might be involved in the Kennedy shooting. The police arrive at the theater. Johnny Brewer lets the police into the rear doors of the theater. The house lights are turned on, and Brewer points out the guy that was acting suspiciously. As the police approach Oswald, Oswald stands up and says, "Well, it's all over now," and punches the first police officer with his left hand and pulls his pistol out with his right hand and tries to shoot one of the cops. Amazingly, as one of the cops grabs for the gun, the fleshy part between his thumb and index finger gets between the hammer and the firing pin, preventing the gun from going off. After a short physical struggle, Oswald is handcuffed and brought to the Dallas police station. A little over an hour after shooting President Kennedy, Oswald is captured and is in police custody on the afternoon of Friday, November 22. That's really amazing. All right, I'll describe what happens while he's in police custody later on. But for now, let's go forward to the morning of Sunday, November 24th. Oswald spent all of Friday night and all day Saturday at the Dallas police station. On Sunday morning, Oswald was going to be transferred from the Dallas police station to the county jail. The press is waiting in the basement garage of the police station to photograph Oswald as he's going to be put into a car. Upstairs in the police station, Oswald has his right wrist handcuffed to the left wrist of police officer Jim Lavelle. Detective Lavelle says, "Lee, if anybody shoots at you, I hope they're as good a shot as you are." That's a great line. As they get off the elevator in the basement, they walk towards the unmarked police car that was going to transfer Oswald to the county jail. Just then, a man in a dark suit and a dark fedora hat steps out of the crowd and fires one shot from his .38 caliber handgun into Oswald's abdomen. This was the first ever murder on live television. That man was local nightclub owner Jack Ruby, and he is immediately tackled and arrested. I'll have a lot more to say about Jack Ruby later. Oswald is taken by ambulance to Parkland Hospital. The doctors try to save Oswald but are unable to do so, and he dies at Parkland. He is pronounced dead at 1:07 p.m., meaning that he was pronounced dead exactly 2 days and 7 minutes after JFK was pronounced dead at the same hospital. Well, that's the outline of the facts of this case. Now let me discuss the different issues arising from all the conspiracy theories. It's impossible to address every single wacko conspiracy theory, but I'm going to try to address the main ones. Let's deal with Ruby killing Oswald. As I said earlier, it's my firm belief that we would not be dealing with all these conspiracy theories if Oswald had just gone to trial and been convicted. But 2 days after the Kennedy assassination, Jack Ruby shoots Oswald on the morning of November 24, 1963. Okay, first issue. Why would Ruby shoot Oswald? The conspiracy people would tell you that this was to silence Oswald so he would not spill the beans about the conspiracy. Okay, if that was true, then who would shut up Ruby? Wouldn't he be a loose cannon who could expose the conspiracy? Some conspiracy people say, well, Ruby was dying, so that's why he shot Oswald, and then he would die, and all the secrets would die with him. Here's the problem. It's the timing. He did not know he was dying in November of 1963. Ruby didn't die until January 3rd, 1967. He found out he had cancer in December 1966, over 3 years after the date that Ruby shot Oswald. Ruby had been convicted of murdering Oswald, but then on appeal, he was granted a new trial, which was set for February 1967. So he remained in jail all that time. While in jail, Ruby was sent to Parkland Hospital, yep, that same hospital again, where both Oswald and Kennedy died. While being treated for pneumonia on December 9, 1966, doctors discovered that Ruby had cancer in his liver, lungs, and brain. His condition deteriorated very quickly, and he died on January 3, 1967. So, if he didn't know that he was dying, it is remarkable that a 52-year-old man would agree to be a hitman in front of so many police officers in police headquarters, knowing that he would be immediately arrested. And of course, he was arrested. He was convicted and given the death penalty. The death penalty was not carried out before he died of cancer because of the appeal and the scheduled new trial. So does Ruby's action of murdering Oswald seem like a planned murder with no chance of escape, or the sudden impulse of a psychotic mind with no conscious thought? But there's an even bigger problem with this conspiracy theory. If Ruby was supposed to silence Oswald before he talked, why didn't he kill Oswald the night that Oswald was arrested? Oswald was arrested on the afternoon of the assassination, Friday, November 22. He does not get murdered by Ruby until 2 days later. During those 2 days, Oswald is questioned by the police and the FBI for hours on end. He had plenty of time to say anything about the supposed conspiracy theory. So you're probably wondering, okay, but how was Ruby going to get to him? Well, during those 2 days between his arrest and the time he was killed by Jack Ruby, Oswald passed through crowds of reporters in the Dallas police station on several occasions. And it wasn't just reporters. Basically, anybody could have wandered in there. We know of at least once on Friday, November 22, the day of the assassination, when Oswald was being transferred from one room to another in the Dallas police station, he was ushered right by Jack Ruby. They were within 2 or 3 feet of each other. And later that night, the Dallas police brought Oswald into a room full of reporters and allowed Oswald to answer questions. They did this because they wanted to show that Oswald wasn't being abused in police custody. But photos show Ruby was in the room on the night of the assassination when Oswald was trotted out to the press. So, if Ruby killed Oswald, supposedly to silence Oswald about the conspiracy, why didn't he just kill Oswald on Friday, November 22nd? Obviously, Ruby wasn't trying to get away because when he shoots Oswald on Sunday, November 24th, it's in the midst of all these police officers and he's immediately arrested. It would be ridiculous to wait 2 more days and allow Oswald to be interrogated numerous times and theoretically can reveal the conspiracy. And by the way, how did Ruby get into the police station? Amazingly, anybody could just walk in. Nobody was checking the media for press credentials. Jack Ruby was a wannabe who liked hanging out with the police. He used to give police free drinks and food at his nightclubs because he thought it was good for business to have friends in the police department. Second issue, which shows that Ruby killing Oswald was not part of a conspiracy: the timing of the shooting. All of the evidence shows it was a spur-of-the-moment rash decision. He saw Oswald, he was greatly upset, like most people in the country, but Ruby did what most people only thought about doing. He shot Oswald. Ruby always carried a .38 caliber revolver. He did so because he often carried lots of cash from his 2 nightclubs. There's no evidence that Ruby had planned on killing Oswald. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. The timing of the Oswald murder shows that it was not planned. On Saturday, November 23, the police announced that Oswald was being transferred from the police department to the Dallas County Jail on the morning of Sunday, November 24 at 10 o'clock a.m. This announcement allowed the press to be in the basement ready for the photo ops of Oswald being placed into a vehicle for transfer to the county jail. If Ruby had planned on killing Oswald, and this was part of some conspiracy and he was ordered to do this, he would have been in the basement of the Dallas police station by 10 o'clock a.m. on the morning of Sunday, November 24th. Instead, we know that he was in his apartment watching TV with his roommate, George Senator, at that time. On Sunday morning, Ruby received a phone call from one of the strippers at his Carousel nightclub, Karen Bennett, who performed under the name Little Lynn. Phone records show that the phone call was at 10:19 a.m. Sunday morning. Now think about it. This is already 19 minutes after Oswald was supposed to have been moved from the Dallas police station to the county jail. Karen Bennett was calling Ruby because she needed money. Since Ruby had closed the Carousel Club where she worked, she was short of cash and she asked him for a $25 loan. Now, this was long before Venmo or PayPal. To send money, you either had to hand it to somebody or you could wire it using Western Union. Karen Bennett lived in Fort Worth, about 30 miles away from where Ruby lived in Dallas. So he said he would wire her the money from Western Union. Ruby gets dressed and drives to the Western Union office and wires her the $25. Western Union gives him a timestamp receipt. We know that this is an accurate timestamp because all Western Union offices coordinated their clocks with the U.S. Naval Observatory time in Washington, D.C. The receipt says 11:17 a.m. This is an hour and 17 minutes after Oswald had been scheduled to be transferred. If Oswald had been transferred on time, and the reason for the delay was some extra questioning by the Dallas police, Oswald would have been long gone by the time Ruby got to the police station. If Ruby was truly a hired gun there to assassinate Oswald, wouldn't he have been there waiting for Oswald before 10 o'clock, the appointed time? Instead, he wanders into the Dallas police headquarters just moments before he shoots Oswald. When he left the Western Union office, Ruby saw a crowd around the Dallas police station, which was nearby. He wanders over and walks down the ramp into the basement garage. Now, sometimes things are just a coincidence. Not every coincidence is proof of a conspiracy. Even Freud said sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Ruby goes down the ramp and enters the crowd of reporters and photographers. A few moments later, the police come out of the elevator with Oswald. As Oswald is passing in front of him, Ruby steps out and shoots Oswald in the abdomen. This occurred at 11:21 a.m. This was exactly 4 minutes after he wired the money at Western Union. This is proof that this was a spur-of-the-moment psychotic decision. If Ruby had been part of some conspiracy to silence Oswald, he would have been in position before 10 o'clock a.m. He would not show up an hour and 20 minutes late and just hope that the transfer was running late because of last-minute questioning of Oswald by Captain Fritz of the Dallas Police Department. This was not a planned murder. It was a rash decision by an unstable man. I try to keep these podcasts to about 35-40 minutes, but this topic is just too enormous, so I'm making it a two-parter. That's it for today's podcast. Please tune in to the JFK Assassination Part 2, and I'll give you the other reasons why there was no conspiracy and Oswald acted alone. Thank you.